Welcome everybody. Staff House at Transportation Museum, Toby Stinson. Everyone staff here kind of knows me. And welcome to our exhibit, Maine, The Road to Vacationland. This is an exhibit that when it went in, a lot of work was put into this. And this was supposed to be our grand unveiling in March of 2020, The Road to Vacationland, which was Maine's bicentennial, 1820 to 2020. Of course, we're familiar with why that didn't happen, a grand unveiling, and Road to Vacationland didn't really get the due it deserved unveiling here because of COVID. But it's been here ever since, and we're excited to have it. Maine has a rich heritage in tourism and outdoor exploration. Maine, especially on the East Coast, we benefit here at the Outset Transportation Museum, and the Road to Vacationland symbolizes the pathway it took to have Maine become known as Vacationland. Maine has a deep, rich transportation history. Transportation comes in many forms. Our ties to the maritime world, also our ties to inland areas, Canada and New England. A lot of fresh ideas have come through Maine. A lot of great engineers and innovators have come through Maine. And that's one thing this celebrates. But here in this exhibit, we really look to tie into all various forms of transportation in Maine, which led to Maine as Vacationland. What that means is, as Vacationland, especially in the 20th century, Maine has been known as the place for people, for families, to get to escape, to experience nature, to leave the hustle and bustle of the cities behind, and experience one of the most beautiful natural landscapes. I've lived here my whole life, so I'm kind of bound by that and agree to that. I'm not saying the best, but one of, and a lot of people agree with that. What we do in Maine through Vacationland is we highlight different forms of transportation and how they connect in different areas going through. A lot of people think that people come to Maine sequentially, and Maine evolves sequentially. By that I mean it was like the southern border, and people progressed farther up the coast, and farther inland. That didn't necessarily happen. Maine has a lot of natural barriers, which are both beautiful, and they also lock in movement. We have a lot of mountains, we have a lot of rivers, we have a lot of bays, and all those networks work together over time to attribute people coming to Maine. One of the early forms of transportation, obviously, when the country starts to grow, is the maritime and is the ocean. Our network with sailing ships and steamships was pivotal to Maine growing as a destination state. Maine is also the only state in the United States that has one border. It may seem insignificant, but that is important. That one border is really what founded the true old traditional, U.S. Mainers attitude. Nobody comes through Maine. You either come here or you're leaving us. So if you're coming here, why are you coming? If you're leaving, why are you leaving us? Some people, that kind of skepticism kind of arrives in people's minds. A lot of various forms of transportation happen here in Maine, and you can begin by, we have the horse and carriage days, okay, and then eventually you have the railroad. A lot of people that were coming to Maine in the early times in the 19th century for rusticating is the term that kind of came about. And I'm going to go back to the 1850s a little bit, but Henry David Thoreau wrote, Walden, but he also wrote a book about his journey through Maine, okay? And it was the natural beauty of the Maine woods. The term rusticating really comes into play after the U.S. Civil War. You have people like Kellogg that has his place in the mountains where they go to get healthy and those things, and Maine falls into that. And after the 1860s, what you tend to have is what's known as the Grand Hotel era. From about the 1870s up through the early 1910s, the Grand Hotel era, you had resort areas come up and people lived there for the whole seasons. Maine was not unlocked to the general population. Maine is not Vacationland yet. How we travel and get here and who could come is a big part. But with the Grand Hotel era, there's many of them, but I'll highlight a few of them. Old Orchard, which is still around today, arises as a wealthy destination summer season spot. You have the Cliff House in Ogunquit, the Poland Spring House in the 1870s and 80s, eventually what would become the Samoset by the late 1890s here in Rockland, Rockport, Maine. The Kineo House up on Moosehead Lake at the base of Kineo Mountain were destination hotels where people would come for the entire summer season. Families would come, and it was a fairly wealthy attitude. You have a lot of summer homes. Wealthy people have always come up here to escape. You come from New York, wealthy people would get to Newport Enclave. Some would come farther up the coast. The Rockefellers had a large estate on Mount Desert Island, Bar Harbor. So these areas, Penobscot Bay, Maine as an example, these areas always existed for people to escape and see Maine's natural beauty and to get in touch with them. Vacationland comes about as more people are able to access that, then it becomes a vacation. And in our mind, vacationing in the modern sense is get away for a weekend or two, or I'm going to go away for a week and come back. That mindset only comes because of the advent of transportation and more accessible wealth in the growing middle class of people. Okay? But Maine was kind of locked into barriers that kept that from happening. Over here, we have a traditional Maine railroad station. And this is an 1850 stagecoach that was in the Bath area, okay? And people, if you could, would come by railroad and then stagecoach to certain hotels and areas as they happen. You might be able to take the railroad as far as Portland, okay? And then you take a stagecoach or a narrow gauge railway out to Poland Spring. Moosehead Lake is something that you could get at by railroad. Most people in the 1870s, 80s, and 1910s up through came by the steamship. It's one of the areas we talk about. We are working on getting some more graphics to highlight this, but I did pull this from home. And this is a classic example. This is the Eastern Steamship Line steamship, the Camden. This is about 1915 or so, okay? And this is, there was a sister ship, the Belfast. And before that, there were other ones, the city of Rockland, the city of Bangor. And we have some other artifacts around here. It was the steamships that really brought the first people to start populating Maine as vacation land. Every day and every night, there was a Boston to Bangor boat. They were a couple hundred feet long. They handled 2,000 passengers fully loaded in the summertime, and they would go from Boston to Rockland, and then Rockland continue up the bay to Bangor. Grand steamship station in Bangor. And you would get off the railroad, the station in Bangor, and you would get into the train station and take the train, say, to Moosehead. You would change here in Rockland Harbor. You would get on steamers such as the J.T. Morse, and you would go through the Fox Island Thoroughfare with stops at Stonington, Bar Harbor, and points down east. And you change in Rockland for steamships to Tennant's Harbor around here. Portland was the same way. It was a network of the steamships which brought people to Maine and from there spread out. Maine has a lot of big rivers. There's the Saco River, there's the Kennebec River, and you have the Penobscot River. And automobiles in the early 20th century start to come into play. So there's this changing of times of the automobile is coming along and everything is based off of carriage roads. But the roads really, the network is so far from being developed, it's poor. Very few cities have paved roads. You can only go so far before a bridge is built. So the general population, unless you had the money to come all the way up to Maine for a summer season, it wasn't accessible to you. In my mind, growing up in the 80s, I think of like the video game The Legend of Zelda. When a bridge is crossed, you unlock a key to accessing another part of the state. Okay, and the farther down east you go, the farther inland, the more removed you are from that. A couple things I brought from home, and we have these in the archives too. A Maine map from 1925, Rand McNally. They notice it, they call it the Maine Auto Trail Map. There are no major roads, okay? So vacation land, to me, this is my opinion, means accessible to the masses. The average American, the middle class, as Henry Ford wanted to say, I want the people in the city to escape the city and come up here with nature. And you've got to realize today, even here, we can jump in a car, drive to Boston, minus traffic. We can be there in 4 hours. But I also have a book that I brought in. It's called Penobscot Bay Treasures, and we're here in Penobscot Bay. And it was written by the granddaughters of Frederick Law Olmsted, the famous American landscape architect, the foremost author of 19th century natural beauty. Their summer house was in Deer Isle, in Penobscot Bay, specifically on Stinson Point. That's how my family got to know them. And they note, it's hard to remember the days when roads were so circuitous and so narrow and so rough that one had to allow 2 full days to drive from Boston to Bangor. And they were noting how the steamships were their magic carpets to destination fairyland, as they called it, Maine's natural beauty. So the road to vacation land really ties into the roads. Railroads were able to bring people so far, but every time you came to a river, they had to ferry everybody across. cars and automobiles started to come to Maine, but the roads were so poor, and every time you came to a river, you had to take a ferry to cross. And it was the steamships that brought everyone for the season, but you're not coming and going on a daily basis with a steamship. As the automobile started to come along, you start to have, and I brought this in from home, and if you want to look at it later, this is a Automobile Association Maine travel road book from about 1910. And we also have copies of these here in our archives as well. And their directions on how to go from point A to point B in Maine. For example, from Portland to Bridgeton, from Bangor to Jatman. And if you follow the routes, there's photographs in here, and it's like it tells directions as old Mainers would tell them. Go down the road to the yellow birdhouse that's by the Robinson's farm, and there's a picture. Turn left at the big rock. Go this far. And it's how people could try to travel around Maine to different hotels with the automobile, provided you could cross the Kennebec River, provided you could find a place to cross the Penobscot River, and all the ways you had to kind of travel, which was very, very tricky. But it's interesting to kind of take a look at. The road to Vacationland really starts beginning in the 1920s. After World War I, people start realizing we need to start improving the roads. The Memorial Bridge originally was built in in Portsmouth to Kittery. People can now drive freely from the Boston area up into southern Maine. Okay, the Saco River was already bridged. It's quite easy. The Kennebec River, if you walk this way, a major milestone step. The Kennebec River, the Charlton Bridge is still there. Okay, the new bridge was built next to it, and it was built in 1927. It was a railroad and automobile bridge. Every day were massive car and railroad ferries. The Rockland Railroad line had to be ferried across the Kennebec River every single day, 3 times a day. Railroad cars coming across, automobiles that would come would go back and forth. When 1927, when the Carlton Bridge was built in Bath, you unlocked almost 2/3 of Maine. Now to automobile traffic in 1927. You could drive on fairly improved road up through all the way through mid-coast Maine, all the way to the Penobscot River, which goes up through Bangor. But you couldn't cross the Penobscot River unless you went all the way up Bangor to Bangor-Brewer area to cross. Coincidentally, there's a very famous restaurant that's a stop that a lot of Owl's Headers do on the way from south up to Owl's Head, and everybody stops at Moody's Diner. Shout out to Moody's Diner. It is not by accident that Moody's Diner was founded in 1927. The Carlton Bridge was built in 1927. Old Percy Moody, the story goes, all these automobiles started showing up, and he figured, I'll put a cabin up, and they have some place to stay. Next thing you know, if they're staying, you might as well have a restaurant for them to eat at. And it was in 1927, when all these new automobiles were showing up and the traffic was there, that he decided to go into business to serve the new automobiles. That happened because the bridge was built. More people are coming, okay? As people start coming, then the idea spreads, hey, we can go to Maine too. Maine's beauty was really locked to the residents who lived here and the people wealthy enough to travel for long periods of time in the summer season. As more people start to come, as the middle class starts to grow, as automobile prices come cheaper, okay? By 1925, 27, you could buy a new Model T for a couple $100. You could buy a used Buick for $50. You could buy a used Model T for $10. Now the families can kind of start to come. This is an example of a traditional Model T with an original station wagon body. This is something that would be had at the Grand Hotels, the stagecoach at the railroad, to the Model Ts at the steamship docks, or the railroads to funnel people and carry people and their goods back and forth to the Grand Hotel era, okay? These were used locally, but they weren't necessarily for the long transportation. If you work your way this way, what starts to happen along Maine's roads is as they progress, the roads get better, and more people start to come. You start to see Maine doing a lot of work dedicating their road building to better construction, and also having, we don't use as much anymore, but the roadside turnouts, the picnic areas, the camping areas, more people coming here to abide by and live with and see Maine's natural beauty. That recreation really leads to more people being able to see this. There's a bridge that's not here that also needs to be noted, and it was kind of rushed and finished as a WPA project in the early days of the 1930s, but the old Waldo Hancock Bridge, which is across from Verona Island, near Bucksport Island to the mainland, just outside Searsport. That bridge was built in 1933. And there's a great photograph at the Penobscot Marine Museum up in Searsport that has one of the remaining Boston to Bangor boats going under the new Verona Narrows Bridge, the Waldo Hancock Bridge, with the flags still on top of the bridge because it was just opened. And it's a great snapshot, if you see it, of changing history. The traditional Boston to Bangor boat, how people move back and forth with a new bridge that within a couple of years is going to take out the old and usher in the new. When that bridge was built, now by 1933, you could drive from New Hampshire and cross every single major river by a bridge, and you could get all the way down east. And by down east, I mean, okay, let's say Bar Harbor, MDI, Acadia National Park. That's just beautiful everywhere. Those of us who live on the coast of Maine, it's beautiful everywhere. But now, Vacationland starts to come into play because it's not Vacationland until the general masses can get here. Maine's natural beauty is now unlocked to a lot of more people, okay? And that comes by the automobile. I was talking to Jonah earlier in our license plate collection. If you find a Maine license plate, it says Vacationland on the bottom. 1936 was the first year that Vacationland came on there. It was a testament and advertising to people. Hey, you see the Maine license plate? It says Vacationland. Let's go there. But Maine people can now drive out of state and advertise Vacationland, and now more people are coming to Maine by automobile. That makes it more of a vacation land. It's not come for the season. It's come for a vacation, a quick getaway, and let's go home. You know what? Let's go to Maine for 2 or 3 days, the long weekend. And that really comes into play. We have in here in our exhibit, this is a classic 1940s, okay, a Ford station wagon, a Woody wagon, which today are sought as relatively high-end collector vehicles. But these were the Suburbans of the day. Okay, this was a family vehicle, a utilitarian vehicle. Pack the kids up and go for a drive. Over here to our left, this is on loan by a friend of the museum, John Harris. This is an authentic 1934 camper. Campers as automobile accessories that you could buy or enjoyable toys didn't exist until the mid to late 1920s, because when people then have their automobiles on a large scale, then you have the access to go camping. Then people start developing campers. Henry Ford and his buddies, Thomas Edison, Burroughs, Harvey Firestone, they used to go camping with their Model Ts and cars, and they had rusticating events to show what you could be doing getting outside of nature. As more people get automobiles, that kind of comes into play. I really suggest you take a look in here. I love the smell of this inside because it smells like my grandmother's house like 40 years ago, and it smells like the 1930s, and I mean that in a good way. And people started coming with their automobiles to Maine. You could stay in your hotel, you could camp out, you could find one of the roadside attractions, and this spurs on a huge tourism industry in Maine. More and more people are coming, more things start to pop up. It pales in comparison to what it was when I was a kid, and this roadside attraction is nowhere near what it was when my father was a kid back in the 40s and 50s. But Perry's Nut House in Belfast along Route 1 is a great example of all these roadside attractions that pop up for people capturing the new automobiling public of Vacationland, which really creates the masses once you start getting these rivers and these bridges built. If you go back and strut and axle, gotta go back a ways, in summer of 2017, this is a photograph of the Deer Isle Bridge at night, which is one of the remaining bridges of this original era that came about in the 1930s. It talks about the bridging of these rivers for automobile traffic. I called it Gateway to Paradise because you had to get through these gates in order to access these areas. And a lot of engineering marvels happened along this route. If you look at the old, the Carlton Bridge, which is still there, is an amazing engineering piece for 1927, carrying traffic and railroad traffic across the bridge. The old Waldo Hancock Bridge. David Steinman was the engineer, okay, who did that. And he did a lot of studies in the 1930s about how do you bridge these narrow river paths, high altitude, high winds. The bridges act like a wing. There's famous footage of the Tacoma Narrow Bridge in Washington, okay, Galloping Girder, which collapsed and fell in. Those same problems existed in Maine. On the Penobscot River, the Deer Isle Stonington Bridge, David Steinman designed those, okay, and he also predicted that the Tacoma Narrows Bridge would follow. That was his study. And his grand masterpiece was the Mackinac Bridge in Upper Peninsula, Michigan. Look at a picture of the Mackinac Bridge, and then go look at a picture of the Deer Isle Stonington Bridge. Look at a picture of the old Waldo Hancock Bridge, and you will see how David Steinman used all these areas, particularly in Maine, as research and development for this style of bridge to bring the automobile across these areas, and his grand champion final piece was the Mackinac Bridge. You can see how he experimented and worked with Maine to create that piece. Following World War II, the Great Depression hits and a lot of road construction kind of halts. Okay, following World War II, Maine, in the first time, is accessible to millions of people on the East Coast of the United States. Okay, by the 1920s, maybe 40% of Americans had an automobile. After World War II, okay, 1947, the first thing that every GI coming home, the survey was done, 95% of every American GI coming home from World War II said they want to buy a new automobile. So people were making automobiles like crazy. By 1950, over 75% of all people in America, families had at least one automobile. It exploded. Road construction exploded. Maine construction. Now, Maine has rough roads, but I dare you to go right along old Route 202, Route 302. Purpose-built roads at 201 after World War II were really good, well-built, graded roads. Companies like one of our founding trustees here, Ken Chinquette, who passed away a couple years ago, but the Chimbro Corporation out of Pittsfield, Maine, they were founded for building this road construction boom after World War II. With roads come more cars. With more cars come more families. With more families, create more opportunity, more people coming. Let's go to Maine. And with these vehicles, Philadelphia, the Mid-Atlantic, Boston, New York, everybody's coming to Maine for vacation. The engineering marvels that came out of Maine during this time period, creating these roads to Vacationland, are considered national landmarks. One of the most significant, and we talk about that down, if you look to our far left here, is by the early 1940s, the Maine Turnpike comes into play. From the Portsmouth, Maine, Kittery border to Portland, some 60-something miles, was one of the first 4-lane, 2-lane per side, high-speed, what we called superhighway in the United States. The original was the Pennsylvania Turnpike, and then open right after that was the Maine Turnpike. So now people could come to Maine, the gates were wide open. And the photograph we have over there is the old original rest stop at the Kennebunk area, which originally was the Howard Johnson's. And it was on one side of the highway, and there was a tunnel that went under the turnpike, so you could park and walk under the tunnel to go to the restaurant on the other side. And I believe it was that way up until the 1960s or so. And that's a really amazing story in itself. The vehicles we chose for this exhibit, as you walk through, really highlight those different stages and parts in development. We're lucky to have this, an original preserved Concord coach, which was used in the 19th century all around Maine and New England. The station wagon goes from the Concord coach to the station wagon. And as the World War II era comes about, people start coming in vacation more using, the station wagons, the Ford wagons, or any other coupe or sedan you would have. My generation, we're the tail end of, my kids are the middle of the minivan generation. I was the tail end of the station wagon generation, where every kid remembers growing up and mom and dad or someone had a station wagon. I see Ian nodding her head. You put the back seat down, you throw in the mattress, no seat belts, jump in kids. We're going to Old Orchard. And even Mainers from Northern Maine could come down to Old Orchard, or Canadians would come into Old Orchard, or you could drive in the station wagon up to anywhere you wanted to go in Maine. And that's the Turnpike Cruiser. Up and down the Maine Turnpike, people are coming and going. One of the things you notice as you drive the highways in Maine, which you don't see in the rest of the country, are billboards. Maine used to have a lot of billboards along the highways and the roads. By billboards, I mean great big gigantic signs. Think, in South Carolina, south of the border and, stop for Pedro, those signs. Maine, by the 1960s, actually outlawed, there's a Maine law, no large billboards on our highways, because what we figured, the legislature figured, was people are coming to Maine to drive our roads, to see our natural beauty, and our landscape is as much an attraction as the places people are going to stay when they're here. The billboards are hurting our best asset, which is our natural beauty. No gigantic billboards. That's not why we come to Maine. And I think that's a really neat thing. When you come to Maine, you just don't see those. and sometimes living here, we kind of take that for granted. That's kind of the short spiel. I encourage everyone to kind of come here to take a look at Maine as Vacation Land. And if you got any questions, we can talk about them anytime. But it's really important to realize that as much as people come to an area, the road is both literal. As roads developed and got better, then the automobile had more access to come to Maine. And as more people came to Maine, then it became vacation land. And it wasn't until it was open to the general masses and all restrictions were taken off by the natural barriers that this truly became a vacation land for everybody. But the road is also kind of a symbolic which term for the exhibit, which means it wasn't easy to get here. There was a path that you had to travel and it grew and progressed. And it was a culmination of not just people, but science, technology, engineering that made this all kind of come together and open it to a lot of people. Today, here at Owl's Head, we are on an airport, which we're lucky to be here because it allows us to fly our planes. But in today's day and age, for Mid-Coast Maine, we're the second busiest airport in the state. People are now flying in here. And so what's going to be the next form of transportation evolution to make Maine even more available to people? Thanks for listening. Hope you got something out of it. And any questions, let me know. And to those watching on the video, if you haven't been to Maine, Owl's Head, come visit. It's a wonderful place. And once Maine gets in your heart, it never leaves. So thanks.